Welcome back to DiscoTrek. This is our 32nd episode. We're going to be covering the 5th episode of the 2nd season of Star Trek Discovery, Saints of Imperfection. I am your host, Jeff Hulit, and unfortunately, Heather Barker is not able to make this recording. She's a bit under the weather, so send her your best, and hopefully she will be recovered enough in time for next week's show. We were talking earlier, and she's really bummed out that she couldn't be here for this one. She was super excited to talk about what we're going to get into, and it would have been nice because something I think we were all kind of hoping would happen on this episode. So we'll wrap back with her on the next one and get her reaction to this. But joining me in her stead is our host of our weekly Trek podcast here on the Tricorder Transmissions, and he's been in my place, strangely, on DiscoTrek twice before this season while I was under the weather. So welcome back, Mr. Alex Perry.
Hey, Jeff, I'm back on loan from the USS Weekly Trek for this week.
It's so nice to have you. I don't think I've been on a podcast with you since, I think we did a Trek Ranks together a long time ago.
We did, in the first season of Discovery, we did Choose Your Pain together.
Yeah, okay, right, yes, okay.
But that was a long time ago now.
It was. I can't believe how fast all of this has gone down, and we're already getting well into the 2nd season of Discovery.
I know, it's crazy. 9 weeks to go.
I know, and oh, no, let me edit myself. I don't want to get into the discussion too soon. I almost had a reaction to that, but all right. So, as everybody knows, if you've listened to DiscoTrek before, we are a community-focused Star Trek podcast, and we engage members of our fan community to join us every week on this show. And this week, we have 2 members of the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook, which is your way to gain entry to the show. First up, I want to give a warm welcome to Mr. Ron Wrobel. How are you tonight, sir?
Hey, thanks for having me today.
Of course, man. Of course. Our pleasure. And next up is the GreenTip guy. How's it going?
Howdy. It's going great. Glad to be here tonight. Thank you.
Absolute pleasure to have you both on the show. I've seen you guys both around the convention group for a while. So thanks for entering our drawing and getting on the show. Congratulations to both of you.
Thank you.
All right.
That's awesome.
And if you guys out there are wondering how you can get on the show, it's pretty simple. All you have to do is join the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group on Facebook. And each week we will be posting a post for the upcoming episode of DiscoTrek with some information on it. All you have to do is respond to that post that you would like to be on, and you will be entered into a random drawing from which we will select 2 of our community members to join us on the show. And you'll be able to join via your computer or your phone, whichever you like. So no worries about technology gaps and any of that stuff. So we'll get you on the show however you can get on the show. So let's see, what else oh, wait a minute. We have to do the Patreon bit too before we get started with the show. So in case you guys don't know, we have a Patreon page. You can find it at www.patreon.com/thetricordertransmissions, or by visiting our website, thetricordertransmissions.com, and clicking on the big orange Patreon link in the upper right-hand side. So if you enjoy what we do here on DiscoTrek or any of our Tricorder Transmission shows, please think about joining our Patreon family. Joining our Patreon family will give you instant access to our unedited episodes, and you'll be able to hear my gaffes after we record them, often with bonus material and before and after the shows. You also gain access to an exclusive Patreon member pin and some other benefits that we are going to be listing very, very soon. We're actually in active talks about our new Patreon levels and what all the benefits are going to give you guys, so we'll be posting that very, very soon. And we also have one new patron to thank this week, Claire McAlpine. Thank you so much for joining our Patreon family. We don't know if you listen to DiscoTrek or whichever of our shows you listen to. Hopefully you hear this. Thank you so much for becoming a member of our family. We are so pleased to have you. And thank you, of course, to all of our Patreon family. You guys have kept us going and supported us for a couple of years now, and we wouldn't be where we are today without all of your support. So thank you, everyone, for being a part of that family. All right, everybody, are you guys ready to jump into this episode?
I'm ready. Woo!
All right. So we are going to jump into the first segment of DiscoTrek that we call Drop the Record. So this is our opening remarks and overall reaction to the episode that we just watched, Saints of Imperfection. So, GreenTip Guy, lead us off. What did you think about this episode? What is your overall reaction?
There's so much that this was just an amazing episode to me. So first off, I just have to say that it was the best Star Trek show to watch on Valentine's Day, at least as a gay
right.
couple. I was just like, yes!
It was, wasn't it?
Yes, and so wonderful. All this writing that it's this great combination of these long story arcs with these tiny little stories that it's just a good punch of like wonderfulness. And I just thought it was awesome, and I felt such a part of this episode of the Saints of Imperfection personally, maybe more personally than most, because my husband and I actually met at church one night. So the saints part of imperfection, but we looked up, like I literally sat next to him and I looked up and I saw this painting of these three beautiful Black women. And I said something to him, not knowing him at all. I said, the one on the left looks like Guinan. And we instantly started talking about Star Trek, and, all these years later, 13 years later, like we're still watching Star Trek together. Well, I had nothing planned for Valentine's Day, but except for Star Trek, so we knew it's Thursday night. And it was like, yes, I didn't even have to do anything. Perfect show. So I loved it. Overall, 2 thumbs up.
Awesome. Awesome. I'm glad that it's such a personal note for you too, as well. I mean, we obviously we're kind of dancing around the big spoiler. By the way, forgot to say, if you haven't watched the episode yet, guys, we are going to talk spoilers. You didn't reveal it. You didn't reveal it quite yet, but yeah, just in case you didn't know, we do talk about spoilers on this show. So if you haven't watched the episode yet, pause the podcast, watch the episode, then come back and join us so you can join in on the spoilers. So, Ron, Wrobel, what are your overall reactions to this episode?
Very similar reaction. I feel like every episode this season, I end the episode saying that was the best episode of Star Trek I've seen yet. Then I have to watch it at least 1 or 2 more times and say, yeah, it's still incredible. This one had really everything I would want to look for in an episode. Section 31. I don't know if we're calling her Agent, Captain, Empress Georgiou, but anytime she makes an appearance. And then the Culber Stamets story is just unbelievable. I'm also married right now, and my husband was out of town on Thursday, so I had to watch it by myself. But the whole time was just constantly, can't wait to see it with you this weekend. He's not as big a Trekkie, but he's loving Discovery, and their storyline is just, it's really just an unbelievable representation of the LGBTQ plus community right now. So to have that scene take place was fantastic.
Yeah.
You should watch it at the same time, even though you're apart, and it's like being across the mycelial network.
Yeah. Modern technology, you can link up while you're watching.
Totally.
Yeah. Oh, so we spilled the beans. We got our beloved Dr. Culber back on this episode, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this as the episode goes on. So there were some beautiful moments in this episode, getting him back and getting him back to who he was before he was unfortunately killed. But Alex Perry, what are your overall reactions to the episode in general?
Jeff, before I give my reactions, are you recording this at the moment? Okay, cool. Sorry, I just wasn't sure. Very, very positive. I thought this was a great episode. This was the culmination of multiple storylines that came together. Obviously, we had kind of a big twist for all of the characters that I personally did not see coming until it fell down on top of us. I thought it was really good. Advanced a number of different storylines. I may have had some issues with how I felt the episode was a little bit overstuffed. I thought you probably could have dispensed with some of the Section 31 storyline in order to give the major storyline of the episode a little bit more time to breathe. But overall, very, very positive. The actors totally knocked it out of the park. It was fabulous.
Yeah, I had to agree with you, Alex. This is another one of the Discovery episodes in season 2 that I felt was very, very quickly paced. I mean, packed so much into a single episode. I didn't feel as strongly about this episode as I did the last one from a pacing regard. it just felt like it was so much to keep up with. And, I think you stated it well with, all the Section 32 stuff they have kind of weaved into this one. And we could have had much more time to focus on the two, quote unquote, big story elements of this one, which was the rescuing of Tilly and Dr. Culber being brought back to life. Some of that felt kind of compressed, and the episode may have been better served to have those things fleshed out a little bit more. But I guess they have so much stuff that they're trying to do before the end of the season, they maybe not have much choice in getting this stuff done. But overall, I was really happy with this episode. I had been kind of thinking for a long time that they were going to bring Culber back to Discovery. I wasn't sure how they were going to go about it, but this seemed like a very Star Trek way to do it. We've seen a lot of characters come back from the dead in the past, so nothing seems too far-fetched, even though I'm still scratching my head at exactly how it happened, but I'm glad that it did happen. So overall, my reaction to this episode is much more positive than the last episode. I know I was Mr. Negative last week. I didn't mean to be, but I had a hard time with that one. But this one was much better. There were so many good positive notes that I know we're going to talk more about, so I'm not going to dominate the mic and bring them all up right now. So you guys, are we ready to move into our next section of the show?
Sure.
All right.
If I could just add one thing to that last section, based on what you were saying, I agree. It seems like there are so many different storylines.
Yeah.
That I've watched that episode 3 times now, and each time walked away feeling that the A story may have been something different. The first time was all about Culber and Stamets. The second time, I saw much more of the Section 31 influence. So each time, it seems like there's so much. It's hard to feel exactly what is the A story right now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's we thought the A story was, the Red Angel, but now we've got so many diversions and different splinters, and we only got a little tiny bit of that main arc in this episode. This was more about the sub arcs that were underneath the rest of the season. We've got Tilly, we've got Culber and Stamets, we've got some Section 31, so and only a tiny bit of time dedicated to the overall, what we thought was the main arc of the season. So it didn't progress the main arc very much.
See, I really like it that way, though, because it kind of seems like it's real life. When you have this goal, like the end of the week, I'm doing this, and you're aiming for it, 1,000,001 things always divert you off your path. And it's like each little episode that does that, I'm like, yes, it's so true to life.
You know what? That's a great point.
A sci-fi kind of way.
I didn't think of it that way. Wow. I may have to change my thinking on this episode now after that, because I did not think about that. You're so right. I mean, you're focusing on something that's in the future and you're building towards it, but real life kind of kicks in and all these other tangents happen.
But how did I not even mention the bigger, mind-blowing part of this episode in my opening remarks? We have an upside down now in the Star Trek world. Like, if you're familiar with Stranger Things, it was so yes! It was like, Tilly's in the upside down, and Dr. Culber's in the upside down. I was getting so excited through that. I just love it. I love every direction they're taking it. And it's so good sci-fi. It's truly going where no one's gone before in concept, just wow, we're experiencing new life again. Like last season, when I forget the name of the people that were all they messed with Saru's head a little bit, but that planet, there too, it was this unique life form. And it's those are the episodes that really get me cheering from the couch.
Well, you do have a good point. This episode definitely takes Trek in a couple of different directions, and one potentially new direction that we didn't get much of before, but we'll hold on to that for a moment while we transition into Play a New Track. This is the section of the show where we talk about things that we learned about the Star Trek universe through this episode. What was new to you? What stuck out to you as something that was maybe new or different than stuff that you had thought before, or things that you learned from other series? So let's kick off with Mr. Ron Wrobel. Anything new or changed, or kind of canon changing in your mind?
I had a bunch of little things.
Oh, nice.
But the one that really caught on too was when Captain Pike is talking to Leland, And he says, last time we saw you were up to your ass in alligators on Cestus 3.
Oh, I had that in my notes too.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a reference. I'm assuming he's talking about the Gorn,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't think they've talked to the Gorn. I'm imagining Pike doesn't know that that is the Gorn, because that, to call them alligators would seem out of character for him. Almost like spoonheads with Cardassians.
Yeah, that was I was kind of angry about that whole alligator reference. Yeah, everybody knows that I am a big Gorn fan, and I am, obviously Santa Gorn at STLV. So I was a little taken aback. I love the nod to Arena. That was great with the Cestus 3 reference. But yeah, the Gorn are not alligators, people.
And I have to assume maybe that's a Section 31. They know about the Gorn, whereas the rest of Starfleet may just think they're alligators. Also, going back, Captain Pike, he's just, every episode I see with Anson Mount playing Captain Pike, I was apprehensive about him at the start of the season. He's an amazing captain. You look at his interaction with Burnham right before she talks to Tyler, and we've seen a few times where it's all about the uniform and trusting each other and trusting that the uniform means something. And for this crew that had Captain Lorca last season, he knows that there's something going on, but understands she can't talk about it, and he accepts her at her word. Don't make me chase you for it, but we will talk about it. I think that shows his strength as a leader, and just the more we see him, the more I'm loving Captain Pike.
Me too.
Me also.
All right, GreenTip guy, what did you learn about the Star Trek universe through this episode?
Well, what I mentioned a minute ago with the upside down being all there. I mean, we knew about the spores and everything, but just that our life kind of can exist there, even if it's detrimental and disruptive. Like, it's just so fascinating that's everywhere, and it opens up so many potentials for things. And I definitely agree with Ron, like watching Captain Pike's leadership style, it's so like he trusts all of his crew so well that they do their best. And I love that. Like, every time I'm watching him interact with his crew, I'm like, yes, what a good captain. And I never really knew that much about him before. I mean, those TOS episodes, but I mean, there's really just the same one repeated, but now he's, different. But, it's just, there's not that much new. And then the movies, you kind of see him a little bit, but I really, really am loving him in this. And I kind of hope that maybe we get to see more of him if he leaves Discovery. Like, follow a show on him. That's awesome.
Yeah. No, I would love to see another Star Trek series based on the adventures of Captain Pike and the Enterprise prior to TOS. That would be pretty cool.
For sure. They're talking about cartoon shows. Like, I hope that they see Voltron on Netflix. It's so well done.
It's amazing.
That style would be perfect for a Star Trek show. Like, make it Captain Pike show.
Oh my God. I'm so glad.
Every time I watch Voltron, I'm like, this is just perfect for Star Trek.
Yeah, that animation style and the tone and the writing, it's all amazing. It's amazing. That would be a great format for Star Trek.
It sure would.
Yeah.
But yeah, that and then of course, the new thing that I learned is I guess I knew the first law of thermodynamics, but I had to look it up just to make sure that was for real. And I was like, yeah, like, that's neat that our energy is just, it's just very cool.
Mr. Alex Perry, what did you learn about the Star Trek universe from this episode?
This was in some ways a very kind of classically Star Trek episode in that it sort of took a piece of science and then sort of expanded upon it to the max. Which I thought was, really interesting and really well handled. Obviously you have this mycelial network universe, this upside down, as GreenTip guy put it, in which, there is a sentient race that also lives. I thought that was interesting. It opens up new possibilities for exploration, which is the ultimate kind of foundation of the Discovery's mission and of Starfleet's mission in general. I guess the second thing to talk about would be Section 31. Obviously, I think it's pretty clear now that at this point in the timeline, Section 31 as an organization is a formally sanctioned division of Starfleet intelligence. So when we saw them in Star Trek Deep Space Nine, they were very much a 100% off the books, entirely unsanctioned intelligence operation. And the implication was during Enterprise that it was the same, though having gone back and reviewed it, there is enough wiggle room in the dialogue that you could take it as it being a sanctioned division that just Archer doesn't know about when he has that one conversation with Harris in the Klingon two-parter. So I think that means that there is some kind of story here that they're looking at play out over the long term, and that was backed up by an Alex Kurtzman quote from an interview he did around the TCAs about how, I think we're going to see the story of how Section 31 went from being the CIA for the Federation to being a completely unsanctioned rogue operation. So that was really interesting. It was a little jarring to kind of see that play out, but knowing that there is some specific direction and that it's the result of a set of intentional choices rather than just because they misinterpreted what existed in the previous canon, I think I'm on board and looking forward to seeing, where the Section 31 story goes, not only in Discovery, but also in the Michelle Yeoh Section 31 show that we know will be coming at some point after Discovery Season 3.
I'm glad you brought that up, because this is going to let me segue into something that I've been really struggling with, especially after this episode, specifically about Section 31. Ash Tyler is now on Discovery as part of Section 31. He's got some crazy amount of clearance, such the way that he doesn't have to disclose any of this information that he has to Pike. But I really struggle with the fact that he doesn't have to stand trial for killing Dr. Culber. This is really making me scratch my head. I'm like, he's actually on Discovery. He's not on Kronos. You can get him. You can lock him up in the brig. You can force him to stand trial for the crime, but they're not doing it. I don't get how you get off and become a part of Starfleet's most secretive group after having committed murder of a Starfleet officer. It boggles my mind that they're not prosecuting him for what he did. I mean, they don't really explain it away. It just seems like they're kind of glossing it over. Yeah, everyone's got a chip on their shoulders when they see him. They know what he did. They know who he is. But no one's like, lock this dude up. Let's make him pay for his crimes.
And then for Stamets to have to see him on the bridge. Oh, that moment. I was like,
right, how gutting was that? I mean, you can see I got to say that was a brief but very poignant moment in the show, because you could see Stamets' reaction to seeing Ash Tyler walk in like, hey guys, guess where I'm back again and you can't touch me. I'm part of Section 31 now. It feels almost like a slap in the face that he doesn't have to face any repercussions for killing a Starfleet doctor. Now, granted, Culber's alive now, so maybe that kind of wipes the slate, but still, he still committed the murder, right? Right?
Not
I don't
really,
know.
because not from beforehand. And, definitely not. It just shows the strength of Stamets' character that he was able to keep going, because that could have been such that's your lover's murderer. So, that's crazy. I mean, I like Ash Tyler, I really do, but I just don't. Yeah, he should have faced something, but it's Section 31, so they don't have to.
Yeah.
No consequences.
I'm kind of anxious to see, too, if they revisit that. At the end of the episode, when Captain Pike's heading down to engineering, he tells Ash to stay behind, liaison protocol, which I've never heard of before. I'm assuming he made that up to keep Ash on the bridge so he wouldn't be down there. Mm-hmm. So I'm anxious to see if there are repercussions. And Pike, even when Burnham first saw him, mentioned that, he killed an officer, and she's very quick to say, no, that was Vogue. But we know that there are folks in Starfleet that still hold him accountable for that.
Yeah, but they're one and the same. Ash Tyler is Vogue.
Sort of, but not really, because didn't she turn off all those memories? But I mean, he has access, but not the personality. I thought that's what that surgery at the end of season 1 was doing when Lorel, had to sacrifice what was Voke so that the body could live as Ash Tyler. So
I get that. I mean, but it's kind of akin to saying if I have multiple personality disorder
right,
and my
true.
other personality killed somebody, the personality that I am right now is not responsible for that crime because it was the other person in my head.
Only if you have a legitimate way to make sure that personality is locked up or like, it's whatever, like in the brain. But
it just kind of scrambles my brain.
And then to be given top, Section 31, your top secret clearance here. Mm-hmm. So he's in a position where he's not allowed to be security on Discovery anymore, but we see him as an operative for Section 31, which you would think comes with a higher level of trust.
Yes, exactly. That's kind of where I'm struggling with the whole Ash Tyler angle so far this season. And I don't necessarily understand, what Burnham's approach to him is. I know that she's thinking that, okay, he's Ash Tyler, but I know if I was on that ship and I saw him walking down the hallway after, what he did, I don't think I could be okay with him being there.
Yeah, well, we're all blinded by love sometimes.
Oh, and I guess compared to the atrocities of Georgie, though, too, it's kind of, he only killed one person. She's killed countless as the Emperor.
That's something that I find very interesting about this season and the reintroduction of Emperor Georgiou is the Discovery crew seems to be really good at keeping that a secret, that she's Mirror Georgiou. Like Pike doesn't know about it and they're keeping it from him and everybody else. The people on Discovery obviously know who she is, but Pike thinks that she's regular Georgiou. She's Prime Universe Georgiou. So it's kind of a tightrope. And I think there was some really interesting moment in this episode where Pike lets on that he knows that Burnham has some things in her head that she's not disclosing. He's extremely perceptive and he's expecting her to spill the beans at some point in the near future. He kind of lets her off easy and lets her keep her secrets. But
because he trusts her. It's perfect. That's a good leader. It's like he trusts her. He knew and he says, I just don't expect to have to chase you down for it. Come to me when the time's right.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. I loved his leadership style so much there.
No, I agree with you. I think Pike for me has been one of the highlights so far of this season. I think Anson Mount's portrayal of Captain Pike is something I'm extremely happy with. I
was really negative before the season came out in my mind because I was like, I don't know. They're talking about bringing back all these characters, and I love Captain Pike now, and that didn't exist before. So I'm so glad they did it. I'm so glad.
No, same here.
Mm-hmm.
Alex Perry, your thoughts?
I think this whole kind of Tyler conversation, and also a little bit the Georgiou piece as well, is endemic of an issue that I have with the show as a whole, which I'll start off by prefacing. Obviously, I really like this episode. I love the show. But through some combination of the fact that it's kind of modern television versus sort of the older style of Star Trek storytelling that we're used to, having a shorter season, it only being 13, 14 episodes rather than, the 26 episodes of most of the Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. And also just it seems to be an intentional choice on the part of the show's showrunners and writers, is that they never really give too much of an opportunity for the story to take a breath. There is, take the kind of Stamets and Culber storyline as a whole, right? We've gone from life to death to life again in the space of a really short number of episodes, and there has not been within that a significant amount of time for reflecting on the consequences at each stage along the way, for providing much of an opportunity for the characters to really deal with it. I mean, how much did we really see Stamets grieve Culber's death? We got a few scenes in the season premiere, and that was basically it, because Stamets' appearances in the second, third, and fourth episodes of the season were very much either tied directly into the main plot line of the episode, as in New Eden, or were directly tied into the Tilly May storyline. And so we really didn't get much of an opportunity to spend with the character in this kind of mourning period. And now we've already kind of moved on to the next stage. And I think the Tyler example is sort of goes to that as well, right? Where, there weren't the scenes in which there was a confrontation around, gee, I can't believe you did this. That was so awful, because the story propels at such a high pace that the next thing comes along and the next thing comes along and the next thing comes along, and we don't pause and reflect. And by the time there might be an opportune moment to do so, so much time has passed that it just doesn't seem right to do that anymore. So I think, it does just seem to be one of the kind of features of this show is a desire to just chew through story at a lightning pace, which, because the actors are so good, it doesn't matter so much, because they do deal with the material they're given extremely well. But I think if this kind of propulsive material was in the hands of actors who were not as good as the Discovery cast is, I think a lot of these scenes would not land in the way that they do.
That's an interesting point that you bring up, Alex, because that's something that I know that I've been kind of struggling with through Discovery and we brought up the pacing issues earlier, but yeah, it seems like there are so many issues that pop up during these shows that don't seem to have the time necessary to address them or to have characters properly react to them, because there's just so much content packed in there. Ron and GreenTip, do you guys feel that the pace of these episodes is so quick and there's so much content that you feel like there are issues like Stamets grieving, for example, as Alex brought up, are not getting the time that they should get?
I personally love it. Sorry to jump you there, Ron, but no. I'm ADD and I love when a storyline keeps going. Like for me, I love Star Trek. I love all my Star Treks, but I will tell you that the one that was the hardest for me to watch was Deep Space Nine, because of the slower storytelling. And I love it, and I persisted, but I almost didn't, because of the slower storyline going, my goodness, when are we going to get somewhere? When are we going to do something? And finally Deep Space Nine does, and it opens up and it's great. But for such a long time, it just kind of treads water and kind of rehashes the same things. And so when a storyline does that, I'm out. It's just, but I'm also ADD, like
that's interesting
the extreme. So, for me, it really helps me that we keep bouncing around and tangenting, and it kind of makes it seem like we're traveling through the mycelial network, because we are just kind of popping out on all these different little branches of the story. But for me, that's how my brain works. So I love it. I love it, love it, love it.
That's a great perspective, by the way. Thank you for sharing that, because I think a lot of times us old school Trekkies who are looking for more, quote unquote, standard Trek in Discovery, who may be struggling to keep up with Discovery, it's good to hear that format works well for others out there.
It works for me. Although I do wish each episode was about an hour and a half long, and we did get more story.
Yeah, but I agree with you. 90 minutes would be better. It always feels so compressed, and by the time it's over, you're like, oh my, I have to watch this again to try to process everything.
I'm with Ron. I watched it 3 times before this. So I was like, when you said that, Ron, I was like, me too.
So Ron, what are your thoughts on the pacing?
Well, it's funny. I look at the pacing. I just watched this morning Encounter at Farpoint, and there's a scene where Riker watches the recap of what the Enterprise has gone through with Q, and he looks at the screen for like 5 seconds before turning and saying that's what he calls an adventure. And as I'm watching this, I'm doing chores around my apartment, and I looked up at the television to see if it was frozen, because it was such a weird, awkward pause. And you never see that in Discovery. I think the pacing is quick, but this season as well, the first season, I get to the end of an episode and is it over? Is that it? Wait, there's so many unanswered questions, and we still have a lot of unanswered questions. But each episode, I feel like I get to the end and I feel a sense of completion. Like something has happened in that episode that has wrapped something up. In this case, we got Dr. Culber back. I can't even remember what has happened in the last few episodes, but each episode, it feels like something happens at the end where there's a sense of completion that I didn't get last season. Last season, it was a 10-hour film that just couldn't wait to get to the end and see how it all was finalized. Whereas this, I'm getting bits and pieces as we go. So there's a lot happening, but at the same time, they're tying up a lot of loose ends.
But I love those loose ends too, because it makes the Star Trek journey, which if we're truly out in space, it's a nonstop journey in all directions. So I love that because it's true to Trek. It's unopened, it's unfinished. It just keeps, you can always keep exploring and keep learning and keep, meeting new people and new ideas. So I love it.
And you look at the overarching story this season, it's the red matter, the red dots, the search for Spock, if you will. And that we haven't talked about that at all this episode as we're recapping this last episode. You would think that'd be a focal point. It's still there, but it is not such a big part of the story that's the focus.
I'm personally really hoping, not just kind of a derail, but I'm really hoping that whatever this experience for Spock does, it kind of retcons an explanation for why he smiled on the TOS episodes at the very, very beginning. Like, come on, make it bring out the more human emotions in him or something, at least temporarily. And those of us that have watched this understand that as like a special thing just for us for watching. That's my hope.
Oh man. Wow, a couple threads have popped up here before we move into the next section and final section of the show. I'm going to put myself back out there again, as I've done on all the DiscoTreks I've been on so far this season, and say that I'm starting to get really annoyed with the Spock tease. It is really starting to bug me. And, they pull the shuttlecraft aboard and they're like, finally we're going to get Spock. But no, again, we're cheated. We're gypped. We don't get Spock. We don't know where he is, and I'm like, I'm starting to really feel bad for the poor guy who they cast to play Spock, who hasn't gotten to appear in a single episode yet, really. I don't
think he's going to show up until the last second, and we're all going to see him and go, yes, and then it's going to end and be like, to be continued.
That's my fear.
No!
That is my fear. That is my fear because
TNG did it to us.
I know.
There was that episode and it was like, Spock, this is awesome. And then, it's to be continued.
Right? Honestly, everybody who listens to the DiscoTrek knows this about me or any of the other Tricorder Transmission shows. Spock is the character that transformed my life as a child. And I was so excited to see another Spock back on the screen again. I was skeptical when 2009 was coming out, how Zachary Quinto would play Spock, and I was overjoyed and so happy with his portrayal of Spock. And I'm looking forward to seeing another actor's take on that character, and I haven't seen it yet. And it's the one thing that I've been dying to see this season, and I haven't seen it yet. Alex Perry, what are your thoughts on not seeing Spock yet?
Oh, I'm totally with you. So I wrote the review for TrekCore this week, and I said that that the one part of this episode that I really, really didn't like was we're now in the fourth episode of spinning out this trying to find Spock's story without actually finding him, and that it is running the risk of making the eventual introduction of Spock, which from looking at the episode preview for next week, it appears he also will not be in episode 6 because it's a Saru Kamenar focused episode. So it's making, when he finally does appear, it is slightly frustrating and a little boring, which are two words that should never be applied to the character of Spock.
I agree. Ron Wrobel, what do you think?
It's funny. One of my notes I had was I always watching Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager. The shuttles were always so slow. I don't know why Discovery can't catch up to Spock's shuttle in time. No, I'm with you. And Alex hit it right in the head. Had the same thought. The next week's episode does not seem like we're going to get any conclusion to this story. I'm excited to see him. The teasers that we've had, and I felt like they did this with number 1 a little bit as well. This great buildup of Rebecca Romaine, and hopefully we get more of her. But we want to see these new characters and these characters that we've been teased so much that it's bring them on.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I also would love to see some of the other characters who appeared in the cage that we got to get to know through that episode. It would be really nice if we got to see more of the Enterprise crew of the current era aside from Captain Pike and Number One, and eventually maybe sometimes Spock. But so moving on a little bit before we get to the final section of the show, and we've made many references to the return of Dr. Culber in this episode. And I know it's something that all four of us were hoping was going to happen, and it finally did happen. But I want to hear everyone's thoughts on how he came back and what were your reactions to his initial appearance and how the episode wrapped up. So throw it back to you, Ron. What were your thoughts on Dr. Culber's return?
I love the character. I felt like this was the equivalent to the first season of discovering that Voq and Ash were the same person. I saw this one coming. The minute they had to hunt down a monster, I'm like, we're going to be seeing Dr. Culber this episode. Yeah. Having said that, I was thinking this afternoon, he has been there a very long time. Mm-hmm. You know, between the time that Discovery was in the Mirror Universe, we're looking at least 9 months, plus the conclusion of the Klingon War. He's been there a very long time, possibly over a year. And you can see that in him. You know, when he sees Stamets, his reaction isn't, "You're here." It's, "I thought I was losing my mind."
Yeah.
So I think his coming back, it was very poignant. It was just incredible. And if you look at Anthony Rapp, I love him as an actor. His face throughout that episode, the facial expressions that he makes when he sees Dr. Culber for the first time, when he reaches his hand through the barrier and is unable to bring Dr. Culber with him, his face, just, you see the life fall out of his face. This was one of those episodes. I don't think since The Visitor in Deep Space Nine have I had so many Kleenex that I'm just like bawling like a baby watching this episode, because it's just incredibly moving.
Yes, I agree. And, you know, something that really stood out to me and that was only kind of touched upon briefly in little bits and pieces was, you know, as you referenced, you know, Culber was in the mycelial network for quite a long time. And I think it is a very interesting view into the intelligence of the character, that he figured out that he needed to cover himself in that tree bark in order to survive, right? Because obviously, I mean, Tilly was in the network for 30 seconds and the spores were already attacking and burning her. How long did it take him to put together in his mind, this is what I have to do to survive? And not only survive, but survive for a long enough time for someone to discover him and try to bring him back. I mean, that to me is, and I mean, thinking about how he could have survived all of that time in the mycelial network, obviously, because once he covered himself in that tree bark to protect himself, it was causing a negative impact to, you know, the beings that lived in the mycelial network. But the fact that he figured that out and survived as long as he did is pretty incredible to think about. GreenTip, what do you think?
I really was I knew we were going to get him back because that was kind of announced and all that. Yeah. But when May was bringing Tilly over and saying about this monster, I personally was hoping we were going to get to see Ripper or one of Ripper's relatives somewhere out there. I was Ripper at the STLV with my little tardigrade outfit. I love Ripper. And so they're going on this hunt, and I was thinking, yes, we get to see a tardigrade again. And then I realized that the monster was one of the gay characters. And I was like, even on the spore side, sometimes we get some hate. So I was really like, ugh. But then, you know, it was like this whole like, well, actually, yes, he got saved, but that whole scene where we thought he wasn't going to get to, I was about to throw my remote at the TV. I was like, we can't say goodbye twice. This
when the arm goes through that barrier and kind of disintegrates.
Yes. And that just heart-wrenching. And I was like, I can't do this. I can't.
Yeah, they're good at pulling on the heartstrings, aren't they?
They sure did. But then what I thought was really kind of ironic was that this kiss between the two characters is what saves him. You know, Paul Stamets kissing him when he was both there and here, and so it transferred his energy thermodynamically into the other side of, you know, reality. Well, that is so neat to me, because I was thinking, in a way, it's like a Snow White story. You know, this kiss brings back to life Only it's ironic because Prince Charming is albino kid on Twitter. Like, I was like, so the Snow White is actually the kisser in this one. But I love that. I loved, it was just so good to see that he was there, and it wasn't, I was afraid he was going to be a voice in his head, for the rest of the seasons, anytime he wants to conversate, he sees this, and I'm just like, oh, I hope it doesn't, because, Tilly and May were doing that, and I was like, well, it could be like that. So I was so glad to see the May pod, for lack of a better word, the little pod that was able to transform out. That was so exciting. Such a great sci-fi, way to do it. I love this.
Again, this is what happens on DiscoTrek all the time, is that, so what someone says brings up other threads and other ideas, and we just kind of keep going tangentially. But that was something that stood out to me in this episode. It's something that we didn't get a lot of in Star Trek in previous incarnations. But the fact that, you mentioned the tear and the kiss that that were the catalysts for bringing Culber back, implies a level of spirituality in Star Trek that I don't think we've gotten a heck of a lot of in the past.
There's a lot in this episode. There is a lot. It started for me when I saw, Ron, earlier you said you didn't know what to call the Empress. I just refer to her as the Empress because I don't want to get confused with the captain. Like, she is not the captain. She is the Empress, and if I let go of that title for her in my head, then all of a sudden I'm going to get tricked, and I know it. So I'm trying not to. But when she and Michael were first interacting, she was crunching on that apple. And my first thought was that I'd seen something with the director of the 2009 movie with the Kobayashi Maru and Captain Kirk's biting on the apple. And the director said he did that because it shows this confidence. He might have even said arrogance. I can't really remember, but I was thinking of that at first. And then she goes walking out into the hallway, and they're talking back and forth. And when she drops the apple, Michael Burnham says, "Go back to your snakes," and she hisses like a snake. And I was like, oh, apple and snake. And I was like, religious symbol. And then,
also throw back to the Apple TOS episode.
Well, and so I was just like, well, that if you're familiar with that creation story, Garden of Eden, the apple isn't really an apple. It's a fruit called the knowledge of good and evil. And it hit me like a ton of bricks, where I was like, whoa, that was kind of deep, because the Empress, we know she tasted the apple of, the knowledge of good and evil, because she's from the other side. And that makes her, like, she is part of the bad, but it also makes her knowledgeable about other evils. So it makes her a perfect protector. And so it sets up that dichotomy of that Section 31 versus the idealistic, Federation, that we don't have any of that. And when she drops the apple, it made me think, it's almost like it's calling back, like, this whole experience for Michael Burnham, going into there and learning, this experience with May saying, there's a monster, and it turns out to be, Hugh, and they bring him back to life. Well, May was striking first, like, he's a monster attack. Well, Burnham already did that. That was her Vulcan hello in season 1. Like, she did the Section 31 style of attacking first, and so there's this whole, like, I think that, like, the Empress is kind of like this, keep biting on this apple, where Burnham kind of seems, through her transition through season 1, have gone from eating the apple to saying, no, let's go back to this idealistic version, because she in the end saved the soul of the Federation by the end of season 1. But it's like still dangling there, because once you're aware of good and evil, you're never quite out of the ballpark. It's like, and so I saw all these, like, little things in there, and it just blew up in my mind. I was like, that is crazy, like, amazing, good storytelling.
Yeah, I agree. So we've gone down some tangential roads here. Let's wrap back around to Mr. Alex Perry, who's remained very quiet during this section. What are your thoughts on the resurrection of Culber and this level of spirituality in Star Trek?
I thought it was extremely well handled, and I mean, the acting was just incredible. The acting of Anthony Rapp, of Wilson Cruz, and also of Mary Wiseman, who has had a really key role to play in this in playing out this whole story. We're all three extreme kind of standouts, and probably some of the best acting that we've had in this season as a whole. Just really happy with the way everything wrapped up. And I think, Star Trek has always kind of played around the edges of science pushing so far as to almost be sort of spiritual or magical. And I think they've made the choice in this season to kind of push in those directions. I'm thinking back to New Eden and Pike's discussion about how Arthur C. Clarke's third law was updated in the Star Trek universe to basically say that any sufficiently advanced technology, any sufficiently advanced extraterrestrial technology is indistinguishable from God. And I think that kind of theme was playing itself out in this episode as well, where we had a science that was so far advanced that it literally kind of had the power of resurrection to it as well.
Yeah, agreed on many points. Good stuff. Thank you for that, Alex. And I guess let's move into our final part of the show we call Spin It Again. This is about standout moments from this episode of Discovery. And let's get Ron back in the mix here. Ron, what moment stood out to you the most on this episode?
I mean, Captain Pike, I love him. Tilly as well. Tilly's sense of humor. I think Tilly's always kind of teeter on the edge of not being Wesley Crusher, but having some of that, just a small bit of that quality. But I see her sense of humor is really evolving. They started this season with her, I thought, being silly in ways that she didn't have to be. An example, when she gets hit on the bulkhead after the dark matter, she runs in the wrong direction. Was that necessary? Maybe, maybe not. But her humor in this episode, we see that scene where she wakes right up and she's mad at May and she says, when I'm done, I'm not going to work through my anger. I'm going to let it sit and fester for eternity. That is a really harsh thing to say, but it's done in a way where it's very serious. But I think there's humor in there as well, because Tilly, her sense of humor. When they can't find their crew on the Discovery, well, maybe they died trying to save you. Hey, thanks for that. I died when she said that, because again, that's Tilly using humor as a mechanism to just try to get it done, get it over with. But she's being funny in a way that's appropriate for her character. Mm-hmm. Her character has grown so much, and I love the direction they're taking her in.
Fantastic. Any other standout moments?
I think I hit them already. Anthony Rapp's acting, his face. Mm-hmm. If you watch that episode again, when he first sees Dr. Culber, when he can't pull him across the barrier, just watch Stamets' face. The acting in that.
The nonverbal acting, yeah.
And even when Ash Tyler comes on the bridge, I think that was a little bit more obvious, but his acting is incredible. Those were really my standout moments.
I have to agree with you. Alex Perry, what were your standout moments from this episode of Discovery?
I think two that we haven't talked about yet. One was the visual effects, which were incredible.
Yes.
The shot of the Discovery kind of doing its partial jump where it sort of sinks below the dimensional barrier, like it's sinking below the waves of an ocean. And that great moment where you then see it from the mycelial network perspective, and the ship busts through and Tilly turns to May and says, I think that's for me, was a particularly funny moment in an episode that was otherwise, quite heavy. The other standout moment I really liked was the appearance of Cornwell at the end of the episode, and her kind of cut the manlier than thou crap comment that she made towards Pike and Leland, and kind of put them in their place, which is always fun to see. Her Cornwell is a fabulous character. And so, yeah, those are two things. And I really liked the crew interactions on the bridge during the scenes where the ship is kind of sinking further into the mycelial network and they have to sort of get out of the way. They were quick, short scenes, but again, I like the kind of teamwork element that has developed amongst the bridge crew this season. And so any opportunity we get to see those amazing bridge scenes, I'm a huge fan of.
Yeah, you know what? I have to agree with you on that, Alex. That was one of my biggest nitpicks about season 1, is that we didn't have that cohesive feeling of the bridge crew. It was most of the characters seemed very glossed over and not given a lot of time to develop. So you didn't get that quote unquote Star Trek-y feel of all the main characters on the bridge being a unit and understanding who all of them were and it. I think we're starting to get there this season a bit. I mean, everyone's getting lines here and there, and we're getting to see the interaction a little bit more. So that feels a little more, quote unquote Star Trek to me. And going back to your earlier point of the CG stuff in this episode, I think that was one of the biggest standouts. From a production standpoint for me, was there was so much CG in this episode, and it was extremely well done. Tilly and May in the mycelial network, that work was absolutely gorgeous. The landscapes that they put together for that, they were just gorgeously rendered. And this is one of the things that has really stood out to me about Discovery as a whole, is how, I hate to use the word cinematic, but this is absolutely cinema level CG being used on television shows. And I think it sets a bar very high for other shows. And, this is not the only sci-fi show on TV at this point. We have the Orville and other shows who are doing a really good job with their CG as well. But, I got to say, one thing about Discovery is the artwork that these animators are doing is amazing. Seeing the ship halfway in the mycelial network and halfway in the Prime universe was gorgeous. The scenes where the network is intruding into the ship and you see the hull being destroyed, all that stuff looks so realistic. And, I had to think in my own mind, okay, this is computer generated, but it looked absolutely pristine and perfect and gorgeous. And these guys are doing an incredible job of making the show as beautiful as they can possibly make it. And, I feel like I'm watching a movie every time I watch a Discovery episode, because the stuff looks so amazing. And not to take away from the physical set building, because all of that stuff is absolutely phenomenal as well. I mean, the bridge, the hallways of Discovery, engineering, all that stuff just looks so perfect and so incredible. I'm very, very grateful that CBS has invested the budget they have in the CG and the set building in Discovery. It really helps with the immersion into the show for me. So let's wrap over to GreenTip Guy. Anything that you learned from this episode, or any reaction, or I'm sorry, but any moments that stood out to you in the show, or any reactions to what anyone else has said so far?
There were a couple, but I have to respond to what y'all talked about with the bridge crew, because one of the characters in particular on this episode, I believe the character's name is Ariam, the augmented human.
Yes.
Who also has been billed as an augmented alien before, and they changed that to augmented human. And so I'm glad we don't get to know characters too quick. Like, I'm glad they kind of stay a mystery, because it's kind of like how you meet people at work. You don't just walk around and give your life story to everybody all at once. You kind of get to know your friend, and then you get to know another one. And so somewhat with the bridge crew, it's again kind of, for me, kind of like life, where that's kind of how you get to know someone. But with Ariam specifically, I'm so curious, because I'm kind of like wondering if we're witnessing our first trans character in Star Trek. Follow me with this. I'm not sure if this character is transitioning from a gender to another, but kind of from a humanoid into a technological life form. And from the billing, first saying augmented alien and now augmented human, I was wondering, and possibly trans species, maybe, this is a human now. So I was just like, so I don't know what's going on there, but I'm excited and I'm curious and I'm just watching. And I just think that's worth noting. When you said the bridge crew, I was like, oh yes, Arium. We keep seeing Arium. But for me, this episode was it was funny because my husband and I were watching it, and right when it was done, we like to give themes of each episode, how we think it is. And he was like, this theme was the enemy isn't who you think it is. And I was like, that's so poignant, it's so accurate for me. And this is another little like window into our world, but we kind of see Discovery as not really a new era of Star Trek, but actually part of the Enterprise era, because Enterprise was the first prequel. And it's those last few episodes where they did the mirror universe that lead directly into the storyline of Discovery season 1. And so to me, I'm thinking, all right, this is all part of the Enterprise era. And so for me, I linked that this episode's theme was, I've got faith of the heart.
Don't do that.
Because they all had like something. Michael Burnham starts off saying she wishes she had the faith of Paul Stamets, who knows that Tilly's alive somewhere. And Tilly has faith in May, and May has faith in Tilly. And as we've said, Captain Pike has faith in everyone on the crew, and not Section 31, but the Admiral has faith in both sides. She shows faith in the Federation and Section 31. And Paul Stamets has faith that this monster is, in fact, his husband, because, well, I don't know if they're married, actually, but Dr. Culber, because he runs after him even while the rest are kind of like, maybe it's just not him, like he's running after him and going for it. And the Empress shows she has faith in Michael Burnham and saving her, and then tells her at the end of the episode, have a little faith, and it's just like, so when it stopped, I definitely was like, I've got faith in the heart. That's this theme.
And it ties back to Enterprise and the theme song.
Yes, exactly. And like Ron said, Tilly is just an amazing character. It's so fun watching her. Like, she's funny, resilient. I kind of feel like she's the everyone character. I guess you can never speak for everyone, but I kind of feel like she's the character we all kind of wish we were, because she's kind of that little geek that's running around, the Enterprise, the Discovery, and just the Star Trek world and experience and all. And we kind of connect through her because she responds to stuff like we respond to stuff. And I just absolutely am so glad she's on this show. My only complaint with this episode was Laurel wasn't on it. I love Laurel. I need her I need her to have her own show.
Well, we have a lot of splinters coming off of Discovery right now, and maybe we'll get a Laurel show. Who knows?
I certainly hope so.
Who knows? So let's move into our final thoughts on this episode as we start to wrap up. Let's start with Alex Perry. What are your final thoughts on Saints of Imperfection?
Really happy with how kind of things have developed this season. I think they're moving in a really positive direction. I am also very interested to see how the relationship between Stamets and Culber develops from here. In some of the interview material, post the episode, Wilson Cruz has been talking about the character's return and how there may be some implications for that and some kind of readjusting to being back in our reality that the character has to go through. And that will be an interesting storyline that plays itself out over the weeks ahead. So I just thought this was a really nicely done episode. My kind of feelings about it being a little overstuffed and kind of stringing us along on the Spock thing, notwithstanding, the A plot of this episode was really, really great.
All right, Ron Wrobel, any final thoughts?
Just this season, I think, is among the best in Star Trek so far. Like I said, every episode I'm ending with the reaction of this was the best episode ever, and this episode was no exception to that. The storyline is phenomenal. I'm loving the fact that the sense of completion. If I had one gripe with season one, which I loved, it was every episode I left with more questions than I had answers. It was so frustrating. So I'm just absolutely loving this season. So yeah, love it.
All right, GreenTip guy, what are your final thoughts?
Totally agree with Ron there. It does help to have those stories complete. It's just like, yes. So this season, this episode really seems to be sparking off this ideological battle now of whether or not Section 31 has a legitimate place in the Federation. So it seems like they're kind of out in the open a little bit, because they recognized what the badge was and all. I used to think that was all super secretive, like nobody even knew if Section 31 was around. So it kind of makes me think that maybe through this process, they might get to a point where they're like, we need to drive this underground because people don't need to know about it, or something like that. But, again, as for me, like as a gay person that has faith, I felt absolutely a part of this episode. And the Saints of Imperfection, what a great name. Loved it so much. Yes. And as someone who dedicates his free time doing GreenTip guy stuff online to kind of help the environment, because that's all I do there is show simple ways to save the basically it's what you do today saves tomorrow. And when Stamets said the universe doesn't let anything go to waste, I just stood up and said, yes! I was like, yes. So that's my reaction to so much yes.
Awesome. So as we close up, we like to go around the horn here and let the audience know how they can find all of us on social media if they're interested in what we're doing, aside from being on podcasts. So, you know what? So let's go back to you, GreenTip guy, since you kind of hinted at what you're doing. Where can people find you online, and tell us a little bit more about GreenTip?
Okay, so I am GreenTip guy on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, pretty much anything you can think of. And YouTube is my main thing. I put YouTube videos up once a week, GreenTips, and there's simple ways, simple solutions for a better world. It's the things you do today for a better tomorrow. And so, anybody's welcome to friend me. I'm pretty open with my Facebook account, and because I like interacting with people. I like to see what other people are posting, both Star Trek and sustainability. So
nice.
I'm a geek all over the place.
Nice. That sounds great. I'm going to check out some of your YouTube stuff.
Oh, thank you.
It sounds really cool. Ron Wrobel, where can people find you online if they want to chat some Trek?
I try to be very active in the unofficial STLV group, and I'm on Twitter at TrekkerRon. And I will just leave with the social media with one thing, saying from this week's episode, Burnham says, words define who we are.
That's absolutely true. I cannot disagree with that. Alex Perry, where can people find you online?
I would say that's a particularly notable sentiment given some of the goings on in the Star Trek podcast world this week, but we'll leave it at that. You can find me every week on the Tricorder Transmission Star Trek News Show, which is Weekly Trek, which you can find online at Weekly Trek. You can also find me personally on Twitter at Alexander T. Perry.
And let me take a moment before we close up and say, Alex, you are doing an absolutely phenomenal job with Weekly Trek. I've listened to your episodes, and it's absolutely incredible. Thank you so much for stepping in and taking control of that show and doing such a fantastically consistent job every week.
Oh, that's very kind of you to say. Thank you, Jeff. I'm having a great time. It's a lot of fun having an opportunity to talk about the latest news, give people the facts on what's going on, and given that we are in, and if you listen to the show you will hear me say this a lot, a new golden age of Star Trek, there is plenty to talk about every week. Yes, there is. And guys, if you're a DiscoTrek subscriber and have not listened to Weekly Trek yet, you owe it to yourselves to go check that show out. Alex does a great job. He's got rotating guests every week, so it changes the script up a little bit. But we talk about all the most relevant Star Trek news for that particular week of that particular month. So
give it a try, give it a listen. A lot of great stuff getting covered in Weekly Trek, so give it a shot. Give it a shot.
And we try and keep it to under 40 minutes. So,
yes, short form.
You can get in and get out. You're in the shower. You're on your way to work, and you only have a 30-minute commute. You can fit in an episode of Weekly Trek, one and done.
Absolutely, it's a short form show, and they pack a lot of information in there. So give it a shot if you're looking for a Star Trek news podcast to follow. And of course, I am Warp Factor Jeff on Twitter. Feel free to send me a shout out, and I will be happy to respond. And you can also find me in the unofficial Star Trek Las Vegas convention group, like everyone else on this podcast. So looking forward to hearing back from all of you guys on what you thought about this episode of Discovery. And all of us would love to chat with you guys out there in listener land about this. So thank you very much to Ron Wrobel and GreenTip Guy for being on this show, being our esteemed guests for this show.
Thank you. It was fun being on.
Yeah, it was. It was awesome having you.
Thank you.
Oh, God, we loved having you guys. And Alex Perry, thank you so much for stepping in for Heather, who is under the weather today. It was a last-minute cancellation by her. She was trying her best to be here, but I think she got the same virus that I had in January that floored me for almost an entire month. So I feel her pain, and I hope that she recovers soon and feels better.
Always my pleasure, and I look forward to Heather being back next week, and I'm sure she will regale us with her thoughts and reactions to this episode as well, and I am very excited to hear them too.
I think we all are. So everyone out there in listener land, you can find us at the tricordertransmissions.com, where you can find all of the podcasts that are on this network. We are also on Patreon at patreon.com/the Tricorder Transmissions. If you are not currently a patron and you enjoy what we do here on any of our Tricorder shows, please consider becoming a patron of the network. So many benefits and so much new stuff coming very, very, very soon. Alex has been a big part of organizing all of this, so thank you to Alex for that. Keep an eye out. We're going to be making some big announcements on Patreon very, very soon. So thank you all once again for being on this episode of DiscoTrek. It's been really great talking about this episode with all of you. And listeners, we will be back again next week to talk about the next installment of Star Trek Discovery. And until then, long live the Empire, live long and prosper, and tons of other Star Trek quotes that my mind is drawing a blank on right now. But thank you so much for tuning in to DiscoTrek. We look forward to seeing you back again next week.